Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from Beyond. I'm Zeckthar.
And I'm Yuksen.
We are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, yet this month, we're going to be going fast, because we'll be discussing the White Scars.
Indeed, we will be getting back to our usual one-month program. And this month, we will discuss speed, as well as some noble characters and the Great Khan himself.
That's right, but before we start, if you like our stuff, feel free to follow, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really like our voxes, feel free to check out our membership program, like Sabinder Byton, our very first member.
Quite right, brother. And thank you to our newest member, Hermes Shkurti. Well, what are we going to talk about today, Zeckthar?
Well, today we should discuss the primarch of the White Scars himself, the great Mongol Khan, the illustrious and mysterious Jaghatai Khan.
Sounds great. Can't wait to discuss this intriguing character that truly baffled his brothers.
Indeed. But I think to be fair, we must start back at the beginning, to the planet of Chogoris. Now, like his brother primarchs, Jaghatai Khan was booted out into space by the fell works of the ruinous powers and crash-landed on the planet Chogoris. Now, at the time of the Great Crusade, the Chogorian people had managed to restore their technological level in the wake of the Age of Strife to as one similar to the pike and shot level of the late Renaissance of Old Earth. The dominant empire was a well-organized feudal aristocracy, which had conquered most of the planet with well-equipped and highly disciplined armies, maintaining plate-armored horsemen and tight blocks of pike and arquebus armed infantry. Their leader was the Palatine, and he won all of his battles with this great army. To the west of the Palatine's empire was the Empty Quarter, a barren grassland with few resources, and as such, it was never invaded by the Palatine's armies. It was home to the wandering tribes of vicious, nomadic horsemen and pastoralists who fought each other for their ancestral lands. The Palatine and other nobles of his empire would sometimes lead forces into the Empty Quarter to capture slaves or merely hunt the tribesmen for fun. Jaghatai's legacy began in the Empty Quarter. He was found by Ong Khan, the chieftain or Khan of a small tribe called the Taliskars, who saw the young primarch as a gift from the gods. It is said he had a fire in his eyes, the sign of a great warrior among the nomads. He was hated by the other tribes because of his ability to see beyond the constant warfare on the steppes to a vision of unity for all the downtrodden peoples of the Empty Quarter. Legends recount of the most influential moment in Jaghatai's life was the slaying of his adopted father by the rival Kuriad tribe. Jaghatai, even as a young child, was the greatest warrior of the tribe and gathered Taliskar's troops to avenge the death of his father. They moved on the Kuriad tribe and razed its yurts to the ground, slaying every man, woman, and child in a murderous, revenge-driven frenzy. Khan took the head of the enemy tribe leader and mounted it on his tent. This is what shaped him into a man of fierce honor, loyalty, and ruthlessness. From then on, he swore to end the constant tribal infighting, unite all the people of the Empty Quarter, and bring an end to the practice of brother fighting brother. Khan fought hundreds of battles against other tribes and defeated hunting packs of nobles sent by the Palatine. Each tribe the Taliskars conquered was absorbed into the larger Taliskar Confederacy, and Jaghatai made military service mandatory while splitting tribes up and merging them with others to remove the animosity from the different tribes, while settling long-standing blood feuds. His warriors were fiercely loyal, and Jaghatai promoted from the ranks based on merit and ability. 10 summers after his arrival on Chogoris, as his tribe moved to their winter settlements, the primarch was traveling along the mountainsides with a group of his followers. A vast avalanche pushed him and his group back down the mountain, killing the normal men. Jaghatai survived, but could not get back up the mountain in time before the tribe moved on. Jaghatai was caught by one of the Palatine's aristocratic hunting bands, led by the son of that emperor. All that returned of that band was one mutilated rider with the head of the son of the Palatine and a note saying that the people of the steppes were no longer his toys. When the snows cleared that year, an enraged Palatine gathered a massive army and was determined to march west to wipe the tribes of the Empty Quarter from the face of the planet. He had, however, underestimated the power and ability of Jaghatai and brought his highly disciplined army of heavily armored warriors and musketeers. This proved to be his downfall, as they could not catch the lightly armored Taliskar tribesmen. The constant rain of arrows from the tribesmen took their toll on the tight ranks of the Palatine's warriors. Eventually, the tribesmen defeated the army of the Palatine, who escaped back to his capital with a select few bodyguards. The rest of his army was slaughtered, almost to the last man. After the battle, all the tribal elders of the empty quarter gathered and announced that Jaghatai Khan was now the Kagan, the Khan of Khans of the empty quarter, the rightful ruler of all its people. The Kagan now began the long process of conquering the rest of the planet, which possessed only a single continent. It was during this momentous time that Jaghatai would meet several lifelong comrades, including Targute Yasuge, Quinja, and Hazik, all of whom would fight alongside the Primarch during their conquest of Chogoris, and would eventually go on to serve the Kagan for many Terran centuries to come. Jaghatai gave those cities of the Palatine he besieged two choices: to surrender or die. Most surrendered, but many resisted and were destroyed, utterly wiped from the face of the planet. Eventually, the armies of Jaghatai came to the palace of the Palatine, where the Primarch demanded the head of the Palatine on a spike. His request was obliged by the capital city's population, which turned on their ruler to save their own lives from the fierce tribesmen of the empty quarter. Jaghatai Khan adorned his tent with his greatest conquest's head, just as he had with his first enemy 2 solar decades before. In only 20 standard years, Jaghatai Khan had conquered the largest empire in his world's history. He now had the problems of ruling that empire, not something he had originally expected. His nomadic people had no wish to rule these new settled lands, only to carry on living in their old ways. The Taliskar people dispersed back to their tribal existence, and the Khan ruled over them all, with his generals by his side. As the ruler of this world, Jaghatai ended the wars that had racked Chogoris, keeping the peace with the threat of utter ruin for those who transgressed against his simple laws. What the Kagan might have created in isolation from the embers of civilization on Chogoris will never be known, for it was but a short while after his ascension to the throne that the Emperor of Mankind arrived to change his destiny forever.
No less than 6 months after Jaghatai's campaign had ended, the Emperor came to Chogoris. Now, in comparison to when we have discussed the Primarchs being approached by the Emperor himself, this is a bit different. Instead of him approaching the Kagan by himself, he arrived with Horus and a fleet of the Luna Wolves Legion. The Emperor hailed him as a true son and inheritor of the legacy he had prepared for him. After all, on this long isolated world, Jaghatai had prospered, binding together the fractured tribes of the hinterlands to conquer empires and subjugate the entire world to his will. This was truly an achievement to rival any of those of his brother Primarchs in their founding years. Now, at this point, most historical accounts indicate that Jaghatai was overawed by the Emperor of Mankind and submitted without question.
Excuse me, Yuksen, but that doesn't sound much like the man who conquered an entire world, slaying kings and tyrants as he went along. That sounds like his character.
My thoughts exactly. So I did a little more digging and found some journals and writings Jaghatai wrote himself.
Really? You read those too,
Yeah.
huh?
Yes, and I feel it more accurately depicts his reasoning for submitting to the Emperor.
Oh, do tell, brother. Do tell.
Jaghatai, who had struggled long with the disunity of his adopted people, saw clearly the benefits of the Imperium and the Emperor's secular doctrine of the imperial truth. Also, and probably more important to the Great Khan, he saw the dire cost of opposition. After all, excluding all the pomp and ceremony cloaking the Emperor's offer, it was the same choice he himself had once offered to the tribes and cities of Chogoris: to live as his vassal or perish as his rival. With this understanding, he submitted. And yet, he did something else that, at least to the best of my recollection, none of the other Primarchs approached by the Emperor did. He bargained with the Emperor.
That is actually kind of unusual. I mean, let's see. We've had Lehman Russ and Vulcan, I believe, challenge the Emperor, correct? Or the Emperor challenged them, correct?
Yeah.
And then Rabute Gilman just handed it over. And then no one knows what happened with Alfarius.
Yeah.
And Horus
Well,
just kind of showed up
any of the accounts when it comes to Alfarius, of course, they could all be lies, but in none
Right.
of the accounts
Maybe Alfarius did bargain.
did he bargain.
But yeah, I think,
Um,
anyways, at least out of all the ones that we've talked about so far, this is the first guy that's actually bargained with the Emperor, which is kind of interesting.
And when I went back over, unless I missed something, when I looked over all the other Primarchs, it's either, hey, yeah, cool, I'll join you, kind of thing,
Well,
or I knew you were coming, so I'm joining you. Or
right.
things like that. It's like, okay.
So he falls into the weird category along with Lehman Russ and Vulcan, then, where it was something slightly different.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, what did he bargain for?
Well, he bargained for his loyalty and that of those he ruled, taking from the Emperor those guarantees he deemed fair regarding the treatment of the people of Chogoris and of his role in the future empire. He would fight once again for unity and in secret reveled in the new challenge before him. At last, able to slip the bonds of duty that had kept him busy with the mundane realities of governorship on Chogoris. Despite having already mastered the strategies of conquest and his own war against the petty empires of Chogoris, Jaghatai Khan was unfamiliar with the advanced weapons and war engines of the Imperium. With fighting across the galaxy reaching a fevered intensity, the forces of the Emperor could ill spare any Primarch for lengthy training in the etiquette of Terran court or the intricacies of Imperial history. Despite this, the conquest of Chogoris was, in the eyes of the Emperor and many of the Primarchs, more than proof of Jaghatai's skill at war. And with the expanding Imperium encountering more and more powerful Xenos realms and fallen kingdoms of mankind hidden in the dark void, they needed as many war-skilled individuals as possible. Despite this need, Rabuti Gilliman and Rogel Dorn objected to the all-too-brief period of induction that Jaghatai received. Both felt that to leave the new Primarch bereft of a true understanding of the Imperium's foundation and culture would leave him ill prepared to integrate properly with its factions and politics. Despite these objections, the full authority of the Legion Master of the 5th Legion was invested in Jaghatai, known among his brothers as the Khan, and among his own as the Kagan, the Khan of Khans.
Jaghatai's closest relationship with his brother Primarchs were that of Horus Lupercal of the vaunted Luna Wolves Legion and Magnus the Red of the Thousand Suns. With Horus, the Khan shared a love of rapid assault, as well as feeling understood and accepted by Horus. This understanding was also only truly shared by Magnus, who, like the Khan, was as much an outsider to the other Primarchs as Jaghatai. The close relationship of the White Scars Primarch and these two brothers was matched, somewhat, by the relationship between their respective legions. Yet other than these two, there was little relation spared for the rest of his brothers, which has a lot to do with his character.
Indeed. Well, to be fair, when it comes to the viewpoint of Rabute Gilliman and most of the other Primarchs and Royal Dorn.
Well, let's start there with Dorn and Rabute.
Yeah, he preferred more to keep with the culture that he had than with the Imperium's culture.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, for example, you don't really see most people that are really aligned with the Imperium saying things like, hold on a sec.
Well, while you're flipping through Jaghatai's journal there, Yuksen, I would say, anyways, that he actually has very much, anyways, for that aspect of his character is very similar to Lehman Russ. He wanted to stick to the old ways of his planet, very much like Lehman Russ did with Fenris, right?
Right.
And ironically, anyways, both shared, unfortunately, anyways, for the way the Khan looked at it, anyways, both shared this concept that everybody else kind of looked at them as barbaric. Especially because the White Scars, one of the reasons why they're called the White Scars is because one of the things they did was traditionally actually scar themselves, which everybody thought was completely barbaric, although they thought of it as very tribal. Which
there was actually, if I'll have to look back at this, but one of the reasons for them doing this was to show unity with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, having somebody who literally will say in front of their people, I will have their heads on spikes lining the roads of Chogoris. Yeah, that doesn't really match with most Terran etiquettes, so to speak.
Sounds
I
very
will
well.
have their heads on pikes. And I'll stack them up, man. No.
For Terrans, anyways, it'd be crucifix.
and he says that, and Torrance nearby is like, you will not.
I think also, well, and by the way, you would think anyways, like from what I was saying anyways, and what you're saying, I mean, he sounds a lot like Lehman, doesn't he, at this point? But this is honestly where kind of their similarities end.
Yes, because
he actually wasn't a big fan of Lehman Russ because he thought of his warriors as these, you know, noble warriors of the steppes, pretty much. And he didn't like the concept of being tied in anyways with, ironically, if he'd learned a little bit about Lehman Russ, he probably would have had a different concept of this, but Lehman Russ and his group as being these barbaric Viking dudes. He's like, well, we're not nothing like these guys. So
I think it was more he didn't like being grouped in and being seen the same. Doesn't necessarily mean that he thought that they were that way, just so much as he had the fact that he was lumped in with that same mindset of, oh, he must be a barbarian.
Right.
So they're both sort of stuck in the same boat, and he's just like, I don't want to be lumped in with this same sort of thing.
Well, here's also the other very interesting difference is that Jaghatai never wanted to be known as a barbarian.
No. Yeah, he didn't want to be seen as a barbarian, but on the flip side, he also wasn't, because this is one of the things about him, he didn't want to grandize himself, make himself seem all so important like Fulgrim.
Well, ironically, that was yet again, anyways, another. Honestly, when I look at the Khan, I see a lot of similarities between the Khan and Lehman Russ, even though they weren't particularly friendly with each other. I see a lot of similarities on the way that they kind of ran things. Like, for instance, Lehman Russ, one of the things that he did, anyways, is that his space wolves were very ostracized from the rest of the legions, and he did that on purpose because he wanted people to fear him, not just the enemy, but the people, anyways, that were working with him. Jaghatai Khan did kind of the same thing, but it wasn't because he wanted fear. It was because he wanted the aspect of if there was ever a chance that he actually had to go against his brothers, they would have no idea anyways how to strategize against him. And he could use that to his advantage.
So to put in other terms, what he did was, instead of, I guess the best way to put is that he wouldn't show anything until it was necessary.
Right.
And only to the extent of what was necessary.
Right.
So no matter who was facing him, you didn't know the extent to how far he could go or what he was able to do against a certain situation.
I mean, a good example of that, actually, and I don't know if we've actually talked about this on the Voxes. We've definitely had this conversation before, but during the triumph of Ulanor, there's a particular time, anyways, where he's actually talking to Fulgrim. And Fulgrim's Fulgrim. He is the aristocrat of the brothers. He is, he's the aristocrat. So he starts, kind of rubbing Jaghatai the wrong way. He starts making a few comments, and Jaghatai starts to get a little bit frustrated with him. And it gets to the point where Fulgrim, and now everybody knows this. Well, I think everybody knows this anyways, is that Fulgrim was considered one of the greatest swordsmen of Imperium, right?
Yes.
And so he's just like, we should duel Fulgrim, or we should duel Jaghatai. I think I could beat you. And Jaghatai literally turns and looks at him and goes, no, you can't beat me. I mean, just straight up. And Fulgrim's just like, well, I think I've got a shot. And Jaghatai's like, no. You can't beat me, and here's the reason why. You don't know anything about me. I know everything about you because you literally just describe everything that you do to everybody because you're so pompous and arrogant. So when we dueled anyways, you would have no idea who you were fighting, and I would know everything about you, and I would just beat you.
And once again, you're also pompous and arrogant, and that would show when you're fighting to begin with, but
I mean,
he didn't explain it to that level off of that.
Yeah.
He just...
It was just, and the way he says it, though, anyways, I wish I actually had the verbiage here, but it was just completely and utterly flat. And
it was
this is the way it is.
I don't like talk from the top of my takes and roofs, and I would take it seriously and you wouldn't. Basically, what he says, and that because you know nothing of me and I know everything about you, I would win.
So I think one of the things, though, that is very interesting about the Khan's character is that he does kind of like what we've just been describing. He kind of keeps everybody at bay. The only couple people that he really doesn't is Horus and Magnus, and to a little bit lesser extent, anyways, than them, Sanguinius. But that's because everybody loved Sanguinius. He was a good old boy.
And we have no idea how he interacted with Vulcan because for some reason, nobody can factor in how anybody interacted with Vulcan for some reason.
Other than
looked at that.
Other than Ferris Manus.
Yes, other than Ferris Manus, but that was because they specifically had that time where they were actually at the same place doing the same thing.
They got along very well because it's like, wait, you like smithing? I like smithing too. We should hang out. I mean, that was pretty much the extent of it. But
how about we go to Mars? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do that. We'll spend 10 years or however long it was.
We'll take pictures. It'll be great. But
other than that, you can't find like anything about how how people interacted with Vulcan.
Yeah. And like I said, anyways, the Khan we got a little bit more understanding with. He had his own personal likes and dislikes, anyways, from different people, but he always kept most of them, anyways, at a distance. And I think, honestly, one of the main reasons for that was just simply because he never knew if he was going to have to kill them.
Right.
It's what's the old Marine saying? Hang on, Yuksen. What's the old Terran 42 Marine saying? It's treat everyone with respect, but in the back of your mind, have a way to kill them, or something along those lines. I'll have to look this up. But go ahead.
Well, I think also part of that is from the ingrained huntsman mentality that also was built into him and like everybody from Chogoris, actually. It's that whole mindset of find the weakness so that if you need to, you just need to make that one single blow and it's over. But you need to figure out where that point is.
So I actually happen to find this this quote. I butchered it terribly, but it is be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everybody you meet.
Okay.
And to me, anyways, that fits the Khan perfectly. Every time that I've ever read anything that he's interacted with somebody, he's very polite. He's very nice. But in the back of his mind, anyways, there's the wheels are turning. It's like, so how do I kill this person?
Well, you can roast them. And then they'll make a stupid mistake. And then you can take them.
And then their head ends up on his tent. It's just the way things work.
And their heads will be lined up on spikes on the roads of Chogoris.
Yeah. So he, like I've said before in certain other voxes, and I think you'll agree with me, Yuksen, on this. He's actually one of our favorite characters.
Yes. And he is one of...
Before we go on, anyway, because we're going to go on to probably my favorite story of the Khan, me personally. But why do you like the Khan so much? And then I'll give my reason why I like him. But go ahead.
It's part of it is I really like that sort of huntsman mentality of, you look, you stay calm, somewhat reclusive, you don't give anything away that you don't need to. And you find that one thing that that you can use against the other person, just in case. And he doesn't really take any crap that he doesn't want to anyways.
That is kind of nice.
But at the same time, he can take a lot of crap and not care also.
Right. He's kind of like, don't poke the bear because eventually the bear will wake up.
In this case, it has a sword and it knows
And it's not called the
where
bear, it's
your
called,
pink is.
War Falcon or the War Hawk, which is, by the way, probably one of the coolest nicknames ever. The War Hawk. That's
Definitely out of the other ones in comparison to somebody being called a peacock or
oh, okay. That wasn't his title. That was something that Nathaniel Garrow mentioned about Fulgrim. But
and some
anyways,
others, I'm pretty sure.
I personally like him because it's the same reason why I like Lehman Russ, actually. Well, one of the reasons why I like Lehman Russ is because he may say, he's like, no, we're these honorable tribal warriors. It's like, yeah, but you're still fairly barbaric. Don't get too far away from your roots, man. But not only that, but he reminds me a lot of Terran 42's Mongols and the Huns. The concept of how they wage war and that aspect anyways, to me anyways, is really cool. Just the parallels of that history.
Especially Genghis Khan. The reason why I say that is because the mentality of how he would conquer is almost exactly the same as the way the Jaghatai Khan conquered.
I would have said Kublai Kai, but to each their own. Kublai Kai was very similar also to Genghis Khan, but
it was okay. This is the deal. Actually, Genghis Khan had more of the mindset of the last time that Jaghatai Khan approached somebody, which was, okay, you can surrender now. If not, just chuck out, have the people chuck out their leader. Then,
yeah,
I'll give you a chance. If not, have the next people down be chucked out. If not, by that time, then I'm just going to roll over everybody. So the guy gave him like a couple of chances. But after that, it's like, okay, if not, then yeah, I'm just going to wipe you out. It's a very brutal, but at the same time, it's
efficient,
and in a way, it can be more humane than just trying to take over everything and have all the people go, why on earth are we stuck in between this war?
Right. But brother, before we do get to the disappearance of the Great Khan, which is we actually have talked about, we've actually in the last couple months we've actually talked quite a bit about the Khan, all things considered, because he is a fairly intricate part of the Horus Heresy,
or more importantly, the Siege of Terra.
Yes. But before we get to anyways his disappearance, we have to talk about his dealings with his brother Mortarion. One of the guys, by the way, we didn't talk about how he got along, but you're about to find out.
Yes, too many duels against his brother during the Horus Heresy. Yet, Zeckthar?
Yes.
Didn't you already cover the first duel in your short fox? The Chaunex Crusade?
Yes, I did.
So why are we discussing it now? Why don't we just move along with other aspects of the Khan's history?
Because this is too worthy of a story to tell only once. The epic duel of the Khan and Mortarion is too great to tell only once, dear brother.
You just want to talk about it again, don't you?
Well, last time I was under a time crunch with a short box. I kind of wish to elaborate a bit with this one, if you don't mind.
Very well. I will pretend we didn't hear the first box. And so, tell me, dear brother, of this mighty duel.
Well, as you all know, after getting a distress beacon from Lehman Russ and leaving him to his own devices, Jaghatai traveled to the world of Prospero to find his own answers on who was traitor and who was loyal. On Prospero, he ran into a familiar face, yet one that was not really there, Magnus the Red. Now, Jaghatia Khan made his way through the newly discovered tunnels under what once was the city of Tiska. He had only been able to go down, despite several attempts to find a route back to the surface. Eventually, he made his way to a large chamber. The space was immense, and the upper reaches soared away into the darkness. The walls curved upwards steeply, to rest like an auditorium, and serrated with bands of metallic ore. Brass instruments lay about it, each one smashed or warped. There were bodies buried beneath the ash and metal, human bodies, mortal in stature. There was nothing left on Prospero. The Khan had been a fool to come, and a greater fool to come down to the surface in person. As he stared grimly at the macabre surroundings around him, he suddenly felt a restless, gentle movement in the dust. A ghostly outline of a figure flickered, burning coldly. He stood a little taller than the Khan, just as he had done in life. His face was the same, though the expression was infinitely weary and a little distracted. His lone eye did not focus. In the past, its focus had been remorseless. Holding his ground, the Khan stood speechless, still gripping his blade. His defensive posture was unnecessary. When the figure spoke, the voice dispelled any trace of doubt. It was an apparition of his missing brother, Magnus the Red, the Crimson King. At first, the Khan did not believe the evidence of his senses for a long time. The Shade explained that it was merely a remnant or psychic fragment of Magnus, a dream of something destroyed. Though the Khan had doubts that it truly was his brother, the Magnus fragment explained that it was not the Crimson King, at least not entirely, but they did share a soul. The Shade explained to the Khan what had occurred recently on the devastated world, and it was their father's vengeance for his hubris, for daring to break the Emperor's edicts. Magnus confessed that Jaghatai had been right. He should have restrained his sons in their exploration of the power of sorcery. However, Magnus added that the Khan had never had to make the bargains he had subscribed to, and the Fifth Legion had never been compromised by the warp as the Thousand Sons had been to ensure the survival against the threat of constant mutation. But the truth of the matter was that everyone in the Imperium had been deceived. The great ocean was never benign, and it was conspired against mankind even as they stepped into its shadows. The greater the soul, the greater the jeopardy. Horus was the greatest soul of them all, and so he was the furthest to fall. Horus had been eaten by the warp. His body was bursting with it, corroding him, gnawing at him from the inside. There were others. The first chaplain, Erebus, their brother Lorgar, of the Word Bearers. But it was always every mortal's decision in the end whether to reject or embrace the corrupt promises of the immaterial. Magnus had tried to warn the Emperor. That was his crime. And the destruction of his legion, his own world, was his punishment. It was pride. That was all. Pride that had swallowed Horus as well. The ruinous powers waited and they watched. And they realized what the Primarchs had not. That only the Primarchs could destroy the Primarchs. Only they could bring down the eternal Imperium. Because everything else had been annihilated. That's what Lorgar called the Chaos Gods. The Primordial Annihilator. Most of the Primarchs, without realizing it, had already cast their lots in the great drama about to unfold, and only a few remained. They were being lined up, one by one, to tear at each other's throats. The Khan was one of the last. The Chaos Gods did not know which way the White Scars would go. None of them did, and that was why the White Scars had the eyes of the galaxy on them at last. Jaghatai Khan had never taken sides. He would take everyone on if he had to. But the Shade of Magnus explained that there were but two paths to choose from. He could hunker down what remained of their father's Imperium and try to keep Horus from beating down the door. Or he could choose to remember how Horus had once been and stand at his side as he brought terror to the complacent. The first would be the more loyal course, but the other had its merits. When Jaghatai pressed Magnus for where his allegiances lay, the Shade explained that his choices were constrained. He now knew more than anyone what awaited those on the other side. It turned out to be the ruin the Crimson King had worked for centuries to avoid. But their father was not the forgiving sort. Magnus had burned his bridges with the Emperor. They were burned when he had broke the wards over the Emperor's secret webway project, after he had projected his astral form into the dungeons of the Imperial Palace to bring his father the dire warning of the corruption of Horus and his intentions for insurrection. Jaghatai did not quite believe the apparition that now stood before him was truly his brother. The Kagan had come to Prospero to find a friend. Whatever else had happened, he thought he had come to Magnus for his counsel. Despite all of this, Magnus still wanted to know whose side Jaghatai would choose. Jaghatai was ambiguous about his choice, for he believed that Horus was corrupted and that the emperor was a tyrant. The Khan informed him that he could choose neither. But Magnus explained it did not work like this. Sooner or later, the Khan would have to choose between the two sides, and the next time they met would be either as allies or enemies. Jaghatai still had a choice, and Magnus implored his brother to make the right one. Jaghatai expressed his regret at not being there at the Council of Nicaea, besides both Magnus and Sanguinius. The Khan explained that their brother Horus had purposely sent him away, for there were no accidents. But Magnus dismissed his misgivings, telling him instead to focus on the future. Jaghatai snapped at the ether shade that there was no future. Jaghatai and his brothers had all been working for something better than this. Magnus countered that this was certainly true of Rabute Gilliman, and perhaps Lorgar as well, in his own warped way. But Jaghatai had not. He had only been a part of the Great Crusade for the Hunt. Jaghatai countered that the Hunt had kept his legion pure. Magnus argued that it had kept his brother away. He had been so easy to keep out of the conversation. The Crimson King had been there the whole time. He just did not hear the words being sibilantly whispered by the powers of the warp. The Magnus apparition explained that it was glad that the Khan had come to see him. They had always seen eye to eye. Though he thought Jaghatai brittle, at least he had always spoken the truth. When they finally concluded their conversation, the Khan informed Magnus that he had got what he had come for. He told Magnus that he had always been his friend. Magnus understood and looked at the Khan for a moment. Jaghatai knew what to do. With a final parting word, Jaghatai swung his great bladed dio and struck Magnus's outline, and the ghost shell shattered, spilling 1,000 pieces like broken glass. The Khan remained. He felt as though moving, even by a fraction, might break what remained. After all, the reflecting caves sighed with emptiness, their majesty in tatters. The Khan bowed his head. At least amidst all the numbness, the truth was now known. The choice could be made, for the traitors had been unmasked. Duty could be done now. The call to war could be given. But for all that, still he could not stir. The dream had died. After this intriguing conversation, the Khan made his way to the surface, met by his honor guard. Through some indiscriminate fighting that does not move our story along, the Khan was ready to depart. He had found his answers, but then a familiar face made his presence known on the burnt-out husk of Prospero, a brotherly face. As the clouds above them began to glow, a vibrant shard of light speared down from the smog, crackling as it hit the stone below. The Terminators turned to face it, powering up their weapons. Quinja stepped in front of the Khan. Jaghatai told his warriors he felt this new arrival's presence following them for a long time. He had been on the Khan's heels since Ulanor. At long last, he had finally caught up. The Kashig moved into a loose semicircle, posed to strike. None of them would move before the order was given, though. They were an extension of the Khan's will. The Khan ordered his warriors to stand down, for the stranger was beyond all of them. How could he not be? For it was his brother, Mortarion, the Death Lord, primarch of the Death Guard Legion. Watching the ash settle and the residue snags of ether burn ripple into nothing, 7 figures within the maelstrom emerged. 6 of them were legionaries. They were clad in pale, thick-slabbed Terminator armor and carried huge power scythes, known as Man Reapers. Their pauldrons were olive green, and the links between the plates were cold iron. They were massive, heavier set than Quinja's retinue, hunched at the shoulders and leaking pale green vapor from the last of the teleportation beams. These were the members of the Mortarion's elite bodyguard, the Death Shroud. The 7th figure occupied a different order of power. He towered over his fellows, clad in battle plate of bare brass and corpse-white ceramite. A long cloak of dark green hung down from the high-rimmed shoulder guards. Skulls dangled from chains around his belt, some human, some Xenos. A long pistol nestled among them, drum-barreled, and studded with bronze kill markers. His eyes were amber, glinting from under the deep shadow of the tattered cowl. An ornate rebreather covered the lower half of his face. Coils of oily gas spilled from the lining of his battle plate, dribbling down the skull-painted surfaces and hissing on contact with Prospero's death-dry soil. Mortarion planted the heel of his enormous scythe into the dust. The Khan looked up at the blade. It was known as Silence, the greatest of the 14th Legion's infamous Man Reapers. Mortarion proceeded to explain the reason for his recent arrival, to tell Jaghatai that he had sought him out, for things had changed. Jaghatai realized that his brother had come to persuade him to join the traitor's cause. The Khan observed him guardedly, for Mortarion had always been hard to read. He left his blade unsheathed, holding it loosely at his side. Observing the physical changes of his brother, he noticed that Mortarion's power seemed to have grown. Something burned in him, dark like old embers. His flesh was somehow bleaker, his stance a little more crabbed, and yet the aura of intimidation around him had been augmented. Back on Ulanor, even the height of his triumph, he had not possessed quite the same heft. Jaghatai commanded his brother to say what he had come to the ruins of Prospero to say. The Khan correctly surmised that Horus had not sent Mortarion. He had come on his own accord, with his own agenda. Mortarion brushed off the Khan's reasonings, but Jaghatai pressed him. The Death Guard Primarch attempted to sway the Khan to Horus's cause, to imagine for himself a galaxy of warriors, hunters, where the strong were given their freedom to act as they would, unbound by the Emperor's demands. Khan was no fool, and of course this new galaxy would be led by Horus. Mortarion merely shrugged. Horus would be the start of the new order. He was the champion, the sacrificial king. He might burn himself out to get to Terra. He might not. Either way, there would be room for others to rise to power over the galaxy to come. Mortarion told his brother that he should not have thrown in his lot with Sanguinius, let alone Magnus. He hated to see the three of them getting dragged in deeper by the Emperor's hypocrisy. Their father had tried to pretend that it was not there, the warp, as if he were not already up to his elbows in its soul-sucking filth. In Mortarion's opinion, it should have been cordoned off, put away, forgotten about. But the Khan was not fooled by his brother's sincerity. He had seen what had happened. The Death Lord had never hidden what he'd wanted. Jaghatai could see how his brother thought it would all play out. First, hobble the sorcerers, silence the witches, drive them out, and rule would pass to the uncorrupted, the healthy. This was Mortarion's great project. He had even told the Khan on Ulanor. The Khan had thought back then that they were empty threats, but he should have known better. Mortarion did not make empty threats. But it had all gone wrong. Though Mortarion had completed his great mission, and the Emperor had handed down the Edicts of Nicaea forbidding the use of sorcery and the disbandment of the legions Liberius, there were now more sorcerers than ever amongst the ranks of the traitors. Horus had sponsored them, and Lorgar had shown them new tricks. If Magnus had not already made up his mind on which side of the conflict he would be on, then he soon would, and then Mortarion would be surrounded. He had destroyed the Liberius of the legions, only to find witches in multitudes amongst the traitors. The Khan had seen the overall picture perfectly. Magnus had shown him. Jaghatai warned his brother that though his legion might be free of the warp's corruption for now, the change would come. For Mortarion had made his pacts with the masters of the Immaterium, and now they would come to collect. But the Death Lord explained that this was why Mortarion had come to find Jaghatai. Mortarion had run out of friends. Who would stand with him against the Ether Weavers now? Most assuredly not his brother Angron, nor the half-mad Conrad Kurz. The Khan gazed at Mortarion disdainfully as he made his complaints. His brother had tasted the fruits of treachery and found them bitter. The Khan did not wish to be dragged into his brother's ruin. Mortarion was on his own. Struggling to contain his anger at his response, Mortarion warned the Khan that he had come to give his brother a choice. Half of the White Scars Legion had already declared for Horus, and the other would follow wherever the Kagan ordered them. Their father's time was over. The Khan would either be part of the new order that replaced him, or be swept aside in its wake. The Khan merely smiled in retort, a cold smile, imperious in its contempt. He would not countenance a new emperor, neither himself or his brother. Jaghatai explained that the reason neither one of them could ever rule the galaxy is that both of them were never the empire builders. They were the outriders. Mortarion had chafed at this role, while the Khan had embraced it. Enraged, Mortarion stepped back. Silence crackled into life, sparking with green-tinged energy. The Death Shroud lowered their size in a combat posture. Behind the Khan, the Kashig readied their blades. The Khan prepared to settle their argument, once and for all. The two Primarchs circled one another, prepared to finally engage in a deadly duel that would decide one another's fate. Speed against implaceability. An interesting contest. Though the Khan was blindingly fast, Mortarian's raw strength was phenomenal. Facing it full on, Jaghatai doubted that any of his brothers, save perhaps Ferrus Manus, could have matched it. The Death Lord absorbed every strike that connected, sucking the power out of the Khan's blows like a leech, taking the hits and coming back for more. The tenacity of the Death Guard was legendary, as was their ability to absorb punishment and just keep coming. The silent Death Shroud were just as implacable as their master, and they fought the White Guard's Kasheg amidst the wreckage. Warriors of both sides had already fallen, their bodies caked in the drifting dust, but the fighting continued around them, bitter and unyielding. As the primarchs continued to fight, the Khan actually felt himself begin to tire. Never in uncounted years of combat had he felt more than a trivial stirrings of fatigue. He had never felt the bone-deep drag that Mortarion inspired. But the Khan knew that his brother, suffering as well, blood flecked his sallow cheeks and forehead, and his rebreather rattled as he hauled in thick breaths. Mortarion barreled into the Khan, using his scythe like a halberd and smashing the hilt into the Khan's midriff. The Khan lurched away, stumbling, and Mortarion lumbered after him. More blows came in, hard, heavy, earth-shaking blows. The Khan was driven back, only barely able to weather the explosion of fury directed at him. When they slammed together again, the impact was bone-jarring. They tore into one another, each strike powered by raw defiance. Fragments of armor flew like shrapnel. Gas exploded from Mortarion's store of vials as the glass shattered, nearly blinding them both. Blood flew in straggling splatters, trailing across both combatants and staining their armor. As they hacked and countered, neither giving up so much as a centimeter of ground, it mingled upon the blade's edges, as rich and dark as wine. Summoning up one last burst of energy, the Khan held position, panting hard, trying to drag up energy for a final clash. He held his die opposed, waiting for his enemy to move. One thrust, one perfect thrust, angled precisely. He had the strength for that. But Mortarion did not move. He stood rigid, as though suddenly listening for something. His scythe fell into guard. A thin cough broke from his mask, which the Khan realized was an exhausted kind of chortle. So, the choice has been made. Mortarion informed Jaghatai that her respective starships were at war. This was not what they had been promised by the White Scar's Warrior Lodge brothers. But the Death Lord refused to lose a fleet for this fight. Feeling the dust stirring around his feet, coils of marsh green teleportation energy rippled down. He saluted the Khan mockingly, and spears of hard-edged light suddenly lanced down from above. Bursting through the cloud cover and crashing through the heart of the ruined Tiska pyramid, they had been fighting within. The Khan sprang forward, seeing too late what was happening. In an instant, the Death Lord and his retinue were snatched away, sucked into the vortex of the warp. The world's wind howled in their empty wake. The ash stirred. The lightning forked. Jaghatai, carried by the momentum of his final thrust, staggered through the empty space where his enemy had been.
A great story, sir. Marvelously told. Yet I believe there was a second duel between the Khan and Mortarion at the Siege of Terra?
Indeed. Yet my throat is parched, and I need a refill of Fenrisian beer. Perhaps you tell of the second duel, brother?
More than Fenrisian beer, but very well.
What? What was that?
Very well. Now, after traitor forces penetrated the Mercury and Exultant walls during the Siege of Terra, the Loyalist war effort seemed all but doomed. However, it was then that Jaghatai Khan announced his intent to retake the Lion's Gate spaceport, to not only slow the flow of traitor reinforcements on the planet, but also allow for Rabute Gilman to easily land his own forces once he arrived. An exhausted Rogel Dorn did not protest, and the Khan led a massive assault of the White Scars and Terran First armored alongside the Sky Fortress. During the height of the fighting, Jaghatai Khan again came to blows with his brother Mortarion. Unfortunately for the Khan, Mortarion was no longer the brother he knew before, but a demon prince, a figure who now had new demonic endurance and strength. In their duel, the Khan was brutally beaten down and nearly defenseless. However, he was able to find a weakness in the Death Lord, his pride. Jaghatai Khan scolded Mortarion for being weak and giving in to the powers of the warp, while he himself had resisted the temptations of chaos and remained true to the Emperor. Upon hearing this, Mortarion flew into a rage, which the Khan took advantage of by launching a second wave of dizzying attacks that overwhelms the Primarch. In the end, the badly wounded Jaghatai Khan was impaled on the blade of Mortarion's scythe, but simply pulled his body along its length to get face to face with the Death Guard Primarch. The Loyalist Primarch decapitated Mortarion, who was banished into the warp in a massive explosion similar to that of a vortex weapon. Later, the Khan's nearly dead body was discovered by Ilya Ravalian and Jaghatai Khan, who sought to take him to Malkador. By all mortal standards, the Khan was dead. Nonetheless, Malkador used his psychic power to try and heal the Primarch. He thought he had succeeded before noticing that it was the Emperor himself who had done it. The Khan would live, though it would take a long time for him to wake. So, I see. You got yourself a refreshed stein. You brought me one as well.
Mm-hmm.
But tell me, brother, before we continue, what do you make of these duels?
Well, first off, the part of the beginning, anyways, with Magnus, I think is actually fairly interesting. And it kind of shows very much, anyways, like we talked about, anyways, his character. He still held on to his friends, even though his friend, anyways, had turned traitor. And they both know, this is the other thing, anyways, they both know him well enough that if they ever did come face to face again, they would be his enemies by the time they were done. And they were both mutually okay with that, I guess. It was very much just one of those, just kind of, you find yourself on the wrong side of an engagement, anyways, with your brother. And it's just, we'll deal with it when it comes, but this sucks.
I also find it very interesting how the Shard even mentions that nobody knew, even himself and Horus didn't know who he was going to side with.
Right.
Because, I mean, they're supposed to be his like closest friend. Well, not his closest friends, but great friends with him. And they didn't know, which is kind of weird since you would think that they would know his character enough by then.
Well, the way that they described it is that he simply was an anomaly because he hadn't chosen any sides. Yes, he fought for the Emperor right now, but it was very much we both think mutually. It's not a, my lord. It's a, well, okay, fine, I'll work with you. I mean, he even states, anyways, in his duel with Mortarion that while Horus is completely not corrupted, he also thinks that the Emperor is a tyrant. I mean, even in that statement, he's still saying the same thing, anyways. I really don't want to choose any sides because they both suck.
Right.
But like I was saying, anyways, this familiarity, anyways, with Magnus, I think is fairly interesting. And then you get to Mortarion, who he's not familiar with. They're not friends.
Which is probably one of the reasons why it took him so much longer to find a way to defeat him. Also, because they had, I think, they had the least amount of contact with each other out of any of them.
He didn't really talk a whole lot with
he really didn't know much about Mortarion when it came to the way he fought, really anything.
Yeah, I think it was more along the lines of just like it was stated, anyways. You've got, it's the what is it? The indestructible force versus the immovable object. Who wins?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things I love about this duel is that's exactly what it is. It's the unstoppable force is the Khan, and the immovable object is Mortarion. Who wins? Well, nobody. Mortarion leaves. That's how it ends. Ta-da!
And then when he comes back more powerful, the Khan has found out what his weak point is. Like, okay.
Yeah. That second duel, I don't know as much about. The first one, anyways, like I said, is one of my all-time favorite stories of the Khan.
Yeah.
But
I just find it funny how it's just like, I know your weakness now. Smack talk.
Right.
Let's go.
Everybody else.
Your mother was a happy.
Your father smelled of elderberry.
Your mother smelled of elderberry. Now go away, or I will taunt you a second time.
was just thinking that. But a lot of people don't like Mortarion. And like I mentioned in the last Vox that we did anyways, I think one of the reasons why is because he's a whiner. And you can be a lot of things in 40K, but you can't be a whiner. And Mortarion's one of them that happens to whine a lot. And even the Khan's just like, I'm sick of your whining. Let's get to fighting, you know? But like I was saying, it gives kind of some mad props to Mortarion because everybody's just kind of like, he's just, the sick dude that runs the Death Guards. He is pretty potent. I mean, he's a pretty potent individual. But and this whole aspect that he literally was just trying to get rid of sorcerers, and it was just that he made the dumbest mistake ever. It was signing on with the warp, literally. He signed on with chaos. Who are entities of the warp. It's just like, what? That I don't get. Do you understand that? I don't.
Yeah, because he hated the Emperor more than he...
Okay, so in Mortarion's book of Who I Hate, number one at the top anyways is sorcerers and witches, right?
Right.
And then number two is the Emperor.
No. See, the Emperor ascends that because he is basically a sorcerer.
Okay.
Plus, he also took what his original goal was, and forever he also held that as a grudge, which was taking out his foster father.
Right. But still, I don't understand anyway. Well, maybe it was just his simple ignorance anyways on the concept of how the warp works.
Well, I think also originally when he chose sides, since, Horus came to him, there wasn't a lot of, chaos stuff yet waving around Horus.
Oh. So you're thinking anyways that Horus just kind of kept that off to the side until Mortarion decided to join him. He goes, oh yeah, by the way, before you leave, we also have these things called witches that we use all the time. But you probably don't want to hear about it.
Except for... when did he really start using them? Other than, of course, Erebus. We aren't including Erebus because he's everywhere.
Since the Serpent Lodge and on Davin.
No, that was Erebus also.
Well, no, he starts using them then. He gathers up those Serpent Lodge dudes and a bunch of them anyways, puts them on the ship anyways and starts using them.
Okay.
So, so yeah, he would have definitely had to hit these guys. Like, go away. This guy doesn't like you, people. What do you mean, you people? Shut up.
No, he wouldn't. All you'd have to do is say, okay, you need to stay on your ship. I'm staying on my ship.
Or Horus is maybe like, no, I'll come to you. Don't get on my ship. I'll come to you.
Because I think the only time that I can remember where he specifically ends up showing up on the Vengeful Spirit is right, like, shortly before the first time that they attack Isfahan 3. They have all the...
He was there at that time. He was there at that time.
Yeah, I said I think that's the first time since he approached them that I can think of anyways.
Well, obviously anyways, there was some stuff going on in the channels in the background before he shows up, because at that point he's already sided with Horus.
No, I mean the first time that he's actually been
on the Vengeful Spirit. I don't know about that one, man. I do know that he was on there anyways before the purging of Isfahan 3.
Yeah.
He was there along with Angron. So
yeah, Angron and
the Fancy
Eidolon.
Pants. Yeah. Fancy Pants Eidolon. But anyways, we are kind of getting farther afield. We're starting to talk about Mortarion, which we will do in great length at some point, but we're supposed to be talking about the Khan.
Right.
So to me anyways, it puts Mortarion up a couple of pegs, or it takes Jaghatai Khan down a couple of pegs when you're talking about like dueling and who's the best fighter. And to me anyways, I think it actually takes Mortarion up a couple of pegs.
Yeah, because Jaghatai is, as we've established,
he's like in our top 5.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal fighter, and they even specify these phenomenal fighter in both of these duels. It's just Mortarion absorbs so much.
It's like hitting a tank with a sword. It's just
and what's even worse is each time you do, you're slowly being sapped your
Energy.
stamina
Yeah.
and your strength. So,
Which to me, anyways, is probably one of the coolest things that Mortarion has when it comes to dueling. I mean, as long as he can hold out, he will
which,
eventually
as
beat
you
you.
can see,
That's
he
which
does
we
a
can
pretty
see.
good job of.
Yeah. Well,
That's until he starts getting smack talked, and then he's like, "Screw that!"
apparently. Well, we're gonna have to take off here pretty soon, but before we do, how about you can tell us anyways how the Great Khan took off? Huh? See what I did there? Huh? All right. Why don't you go ahead and tell us how he disappeared?
Okay, now 7 Terran years after the end of the Horus Heresy, during the period called the Time of Rebirth, the Imperium was largely guided by the Ultramarines Primarch and Lord Commander of the Imperium, Rabute Gilliman. Why didn't... No, man. I was just wondering why Rogel Dorn wasn't the person that was put in charge, but...
I will get to that after you're done telling us what happened to the White Scars leader.
Yeah.
It's actually a fairly interesting story, but yes, carry on, sir.
The White Scars adopted Gilliman's Codex Astartes, and the 5th Legion allowed itself to be grudgingly divided into several different successor chapters. In order to contain the outlaws, renegades, and aliens that dwell within the warp rift called the Maelstrom, that had taken advantage of the disruptions of the Horus Heresy to run amok in the Ultima Segmentum, Rabute Gilliman ordered the surrounding star systems to be reinforced. The White Scars were tasked with the main responsibility of securing the Yazan sector, the star systems that surrounded their homeworld. According to the writings about the Great Khan, found in the White Scars fortress monastery of Quanzhou, the White Scars learned upon their return to Chogoris following the end of the heresy that their homeworld and its people have been the target of numerous raids by the Drukhari to seize thousands of Chogorians as slaves. Jaghatai swore many oaths against the Drukhari because of this crime and fought them in many battles until peace had largely been restored amongst the imperial worlds that were adjacent to the Maelstrom.
Yay!
Jaghatai fought alongside his White Scars for another 70 standard years following the end of the Horus Heresy, eventually disappearing in 84.M31 when he traveled into the Maelstrom. Jaghatai is believed to have been in pursuit of the Drukhari, who had savaged Chogoris following the Battle of Coruscant V with its first Brotherhood, when he went through a warp gate into the Drukhari portion of the webway, ultimately vanishing forever. Jaghatai had been in pursuit of a mighty Drukhari lord, likely the Archon of the Cabal, that had attacked Coruscant V, and perhaps even Chogoris itself. None can say what befell the Primarch, if he was lost in the warp or if he was... What?
Pardon me, Yuksen, but is this by any chance the same cabal that John Chromaticus worked with?
No.
No? You sure?
Yes.
This is a different cabal.
Spelled with a C, this is spelled with a K.
Ah, fair enough. Fair enough, good sir. I was just looking at this and I was just like, wait, don't tell me. This is the same bloody cabal that John Chromaticus is part of?
No, they were probably still messing around. No, they were killed off, weren't they?
The cabal was eventually killed off, yes.
No, they were like basically starting to be killed off before the Siege of Terror, I think.
Well, while you're finishing this, I can go ahead and look that up. So, sorry to interrupt, but carry on, sir.
Okay. Like the Archon of the Cabal that attacked Coruscant V, and perhaps even Chogoris itself. None can say what befell the Primarch, if he was lost in the warp or if he was slain or captured at the hands of an alien warlord. But the White Scars believe he still hunts across the galaxy and beyond in pursuit of his greatest foes. The White Scars believe the Great Khan is still alive somewhere within the webway and will one day return to the chapter in a time of great need. As a result of the Primarch's disappearance, the White Scars hold a particularly savage grudge against the Drukhari, and will gladly seek out any opportunity to make war upon those sadistic aliens, like they really needed to. The White Scars thus continue to fight in Jaghatai's name, destroying the enemies of the Emperor in preparation for the day the Great Khan completes his consummate hunt and returns to once again lead his chosen warriors and begin the next great crusade to unify the galaxy.
Yes, yes. Well, first off, before we take off, to answer a couple of those questions. First one, anyways, you asked was why Rogel Dorn didn't take over.
Right?
The reason for that is that, quite frankly, Rogel Dorn was kind of shell-shocked at the end of the Siege of Terra. I mean, the Emperor had pretty much died on his watch. I mean, he didn't actually die, but he kind of did.
Well, that's debatable.
So when Rabute Gilliman showed up,
soul remains.
So when Rabute Gilliman showed up, Rogel Dorn wasn't in any state of mind to lead the Imperium. And then by the time that he was in a state of mind, I mean, okay, first off, anyways, Rogel Dorn, you have to understand, this is the first time Rogel Dorn has ever seen failure.
Which is kind of sad how he took it, so.
Well, it's kind of sad, but at the same time, it's kind of impressive. I mean, he'd never failed before that. So, I mean, well, not only that, but if you're calling this a failure, saving the Imperium, okay. I mean, we did actually a poll before we did the Siege of Terra, and I asked the question. I said, who would have done a better job leading the forces of loyalists against Horus during the Siege of Terra? And I had 4 options, and one was Rabute Gilliman, another one was Jaghatai Khan, then I think it was Sanguinius was the third one, ironically, or maybe it was Vulcan. I can't remember. But the fourth one was Rogel Dorn. And followed by a comment anyways, it just said anyways, he did a good job. And resoundingly anyways, everybody that voted on that, they all said Rogel, okay, not all of them, but most of them said Rogel Dorn.
I had to put Sanguinius there.
Yeah. I don't think I put in Sanguinius.
All that and that
but the majority of them actually said Rogel Dorn, and through the comments, actually most people said, yeah, he actually did a really good job with it. And I kind of agree. I mentioned last week anyway. They said if Rogel Dorn wasn't in charge of the Siege of Terra, Horus probably would have won. So if you're and he's looking at that as a failure,
right?
It's kind of saying something about Rogel Dorn. And eventually, Rogel Dorn does, kind of pick himself up by his bootstraps, and he gets to work. But by that point, anyways,
again, and then loses his hand.
Yeah, but at the same time, anyway, okay, yeah, he does lose again, and he does lose his hand. But
yeah,
but there's also a lot of victories in there. You can't just say after the Siege of Terror he was just a loser that just kept losing. That didn't happen. He just lost twice. Once his hand. But but by the time he gets ready and he's back in a mental state anyways of like, okay, I'm good to go. By that point, Rabute Gilliman had pretty much already taken over the Empire. And Rogel Dorn looked at it and realized it's like, okay, either A, I can be just like, no, hang on, have a second, Chief. I was the one that defended the Imperium, which would start a whole new civil war, which he did not want. Or 2, he's like, you know what? Rabute Gilliman's actually doing a pretty good job, which he was. So we should just go ahead and do this. And then Rabute Gilliman came up with the Codex of Astartes, which Dorn had a huge problem with, and that almost started that civil war that I was just talking about. But but yeah, that is why Rogel Dorn
he couldn't have the same aspect as Russ going, F you, I'm doing whatever I want to do.
Well, because all of his guys got the crap kicked out of him in the Siege of Terror. So it's kind of like, well, no, I mean, it literally almost came to blows. And that one, honestly, I probably would have been the destruction of the Imperium. I mean, think about it. You would have had the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, the Space Wolves, and the Imperial Fist on one side. And then you have the Ultramarines, the Blood Angels, and the rest of them anyways on the other side. It would have killed the Imperium. Because there would have been one lone orc war boss in the background going, They're all killing each other. Time for a good crumpin'. And he would have just kind of killed everybody after they were done killing each other. That's what would have happened.
Or if that didn't happen and they barely survived, they would have been wiped out by the beast. Or the beasts. Plural.
Yeah. Somebody would have killed them all. But to answer your second question, anyways, about the Cabal and when they died. So apparently, by the middle centuries of the 32nd millennium, Eldron Uthron would report that the Cabal no longer existed and that its chosen path to destroy chaos had proven a failure. So to answer your question, they started to separate and kind of sprinkle apart anyways towards the end of the Horus Heresy. And by the 32nd millennium anyways, so 2,000 years after the Horus or 1,000 years after the Horus Heresy, they no longer existed.
Yeah.
That's what this one guy says. But I'm sure, because as you know anyways, Alpha Legion had a hand in the Cabal. So I'm sure at some point they will probably pop back up again with Alpharius.
I still think that Alpha Legion, and there's some other sources that start popping up, written by the wonderful historian Mike Brooks. He's come out with a couple of new findings concerning Alpha Legion.
Interesting. Well, before we go anyways, I do have a quick question for you with the Khan, because we are talking about the Khan. Not the Cabal, not Rogel Dorn, not Mortarion. Ironically, the Khan has tricked us all to talking about other people. And he kind of likes it that way. But to end this box, what do you think happened to the Khan? I mean, it sounds like he's in the Webway project, or he's in the Webways. So do you think anyways he's like a prisoner at Kamarach? And Drukhari have just been kicking the crap out of him? Or do you think he has found some like maybe Harlequins or Ranger or Aldari Rangers, and he's just gone on a brutal campaign to just kind of kill all the Drukhari, and he will show back up again?
I'm leaning more towards the fact that he's run into some Harlequins.
Why is that?
Part of that's because I kind of just want that to happen. Other part is I can see them being one of the few factions that actually like literally lives in the Webway.
Mm-hmm.
And also they've been known to work with other races.
True.
In many cases. The other option that I see is him just wandering around in the Webway, because the Webway is like ever changing.
Right. Kind of like
there's the Dark Eldar, there's a Drukhari there, I'll kill it. And then turns around and is like, oh crap.
He's kind of like Terran 42.
Dead end where I just came from there. What the heck?
He's kind of like Terran 42's Bugs Bunny, popping up out of a hall, looking at a map and going, I knew I took a wrong turn at Albuquerque. That's what you're thinking the Khan's doing at this point. He's like, I'm out. Dang it. Nope. All right. Back in the hole. Well, on that interesting note, that be it for this week. Join us next week as we discuss the amazing vehicles of the White Scars, including, of course, their bikes, obviously.
We aren't talking about their Legion itself?
No, we're talking about their vehicles. Because, as you know, it's the White Scars. We got to go fast. And everything you know about fast, anyways, has to do with their vehicles.
Okay.
Or are you asking, anyways, are we doing notable characters next week? No, we're doing that the week after.
So we aren't going to talk about the Legion itself at all?
Probably not.
Okay.
Well, as Yuksen grumbles to himself about that, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this box. Feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and comment. And don't forget to check out our shop. We got some cool stuff there like clothes, pillows, and hats.
And don't forget the rabbits, Zeckthar.
Oh, no. Right. I can't forget the rabbits. Have a great day. And as always, until next time, this is Zeckthar.
And Yuksen.
Signing off.